In the early 1980s, Mattel designers, marketing managers, packaging designers, well, the whole creative team, put out their own boys' action line, Masters of the Universe, starring He-Man and Skeletor. And even those working on it, as they sort of kitbash different concepts that had been floating around, had no idea that the brand was going to go on to become a billion-dollar brand, outpacing Barbie and Hot Wheels in 84 and 85. Yeah, that's a real big deal to a company like Mattel. And, well, while not every iteration of Masters of the Universe has been a runaway hit like it was in the early 80s, and a big part of that is due to the Filmation show, which aired every day during weekdays and drew in lots of kids, which resulted in toy sales, well, there are obviously different iterations of the brand that, more or less have been black sheep. And, well, for years, almost decades, kind of the, well, less liked of all of the iterations of Masters of the Universe tends to be the New Adventures of He-Man. Believe me, if you think the fans are down on this show, you should talk to some of the Mattel executives. Like, they won't even talk about this line if they worked on it. It's kind of like considered like, yeah, we don't talk about Adventures of He-Man. All right, so for those of you who are newbies or not familiar with the New Adventures, it was a late 1980s, early 90s relaunch of the brand where He-Man went off into outer space to fight Space Mutants. Of course, Skeletor followed him, and all the characters changed a lot, especially from a scale point. Instead of being 5.5-inch figures, they were now 4 inches. They lost the giant muscles. I mean, they were so muscular, but they weren't made of muscles the way the original 82 line was. And while it had a lot going for it, the line, well, it was weird. It had a lot of weird stuff going on. It was, it had the Barbarian and the space, and He-Man was there, but he didn't look at all like He-Man from the cartoon show or the original line. And, well, to say the least, really the only toy that did very well was the Power Sword. It outsold all of the action figures, all the vehicles, all the playsets. Hey, roleplay does that. All right. So who were all these characters in the New Adventures line? Well, as I said, while He-Man and Skeletor were carried forward into their outer space adventure, they were each given a group of new allies and, well, enemies to cohort with, shall we say. There was a lot of tooling also done for the line. Almost every figure was 100% newly tooled, unlike the original vintage He-Man line where everyone shared basic arms, legs, and torsos. Usually a new head and armor could transform a character into another one, and while there were originally 3 body types, they expanded. For New Adventures, because of the massive amounts of original tooling, we had to be really conscious of how we were going to translate these figures into the Classics line, because we knew we couldn't afford to do them as fully tooled figures. Now, most of the Galactic Guardians, Galactic Protectors, He-Man's allies, whichever name is currently being used due to copyright, they were mostly humans with new armor. On the other hand, Skeletor and his Space Mutants, that's where the tooling fell, because while some of them had human-esque arms, there was a lot of animal, a lot of sort of aquatic stuff going on with bumps on the skin and gills and scales and stuff like that in all of the mutants. So finding ways to translate these figures into the Classics line, which used a lot of shared tooling as a cost measure, essentially mimicking what they did in the vintage line, well, we had to be conscious of this. And we wanted to make a direct effort to do some of the more obscure mutants and the more obscure Galactic Guardian / Galactic Protectors. The name had to get changed for copyright reasons, what can I say? And this meant really planning out how we were going to execute, especially the Space Mutants. We didn't want to just do the main guys because, well, while our intent was to do as many of the New Adventures characters as possible, we felt that if we only did main guys, that would reinforce the fact that it was a sort of a black sheep property within the brand, and we wanted to celebrate everything about New Adventures. So we spent a lot of time online looking at which characters were talked about, which characters, say, had fan art. That becomes a big thing, because when fans create original art of characters, that's a direct representation of love for that character. And of course, we looked at how the characters were portrayed on the show. And did they visually match the toy? Was it a very different look? Were there key weapons or key items or key episodes that a character was in? So when it came to the slot, we looked at a few different mutants. Karatti was sort of in the mix, Hoove was in the mix, and Lizor. The slot was basically defined as sort of B-C-list villain from New Adventures. And I love lizard people, if you will. I mean, not the lizard people that, are trying to take over the world, that live in the center of the earth and are really disguised as the British royalty. I'm talking about like lizard people like monsters, like characters from Edgar Rice Burroughs and, Warlord comic books. And I really wanted to do Lizor. It just kind of seemed like we had a lot of lizard characters already with Whiplash and others like that. So in the end, we wound up going with Karatti for this slot, which again was designated when we remixed the line after fan feedback in 2012 that we wanted it, it was really just defined as a B-C list villain from New Adventures. Why did we go with Karatti? Well, part of it was because of the Predator. When we were looking at the designs, we were thinking like, wow, Karatti's kind of like the Predator of Masters of the Universe. And, well, that just became the thing. Also, the Horsemen really liked it because of the color scheme. They had never worked on a green and yellow-orange figure before. Ironically, the next figure in the line would share that color scheme, but more on that next time. So, after reviewing all of the characters, good guys, bad guys, we had basically come to the conclusion that we were going to go with Karatti. I think it actually might have almost come to a coin flip between Karatti and Lizor, if I recall. I mean, maybe not literally a coin flip, but again, realizing we already had some lizard characters in the line, and hey, that whole dreadlock predator thing he had going was pretty cool. Now, as far as his name, Karatti, this is something we were conscious of because we knew previously when we had done the Karatti Kid figure in the Legion of Superheroes pack. You can see him on the right there in the white gi with the black shirt. Here, I'll just get a close-up of just him. So this character, Karatti Kid, is owned by DC. They actually own the copyright to the name, which is interesting because when the movie was made, you're probably familiar with Cobra Kai, the Netflix show, but there was a movie. There were actually 4 movies. And they actually had to pay royalties to DC Comics to use the name Karatti Kid because, it was owned by DC because of the Legion of Superheroes character. And we weren't sure if that was going to carry forward to a character just called Karatti, but it turned out it wasn't. Karatti is a generic enough term. Without the word kid next to it, it no longer becomes a copyright issue. So he got to keep his name. Others had to use their European name. That wound up happening quite a few times in the line, like Icarius was used. So whenever, because Flipshot was not available. It was a Nerf gun, I believe. All right, so now that we jumped that hurdle, climbed that hurdle, and we knew we could make Karatti, it was time to look at how we could do this with shared parts. And while fans weren't the biggest fans of using Trapjaw's legs a lot, they were. They weren't an exact, but you get a lot from a head. So even if you're using just generic bodies, legs that have been reused, it is amazing the mileage you get out of an original head. It really is what defines a character. And of course, he got his original weapons. Maybe not as iconic, but it's always cool to have more space knives and blaster axes in the line. And essentially with the human body underneath, Trapjaw's legs, and the new arms and chest armor that clipped on, that was sort of our way of getting around the fully tooled issue. Because in the vintage line, the armor was not removable. It was his chest. So having the removable armor really helped. Now, we did look at the other ways he was portrayed once we decided on Karatti, and in the show he had a slightly different color scheme, skin being a little bit more aqua, and he was more of a pistol character than a blade character, but we felt that if we didn't think we were going to get to more than one Karatti. He was just too obscure of a character. Although we did also look at the prototype version of him, which was very different as well, with the red skin and the blue outfit. But it did kind of come down to, look, if we're only going to get one shot at Karatti, we really should do the direct toy version, since that's the most well-known, which is ironic because in POP we went with the animated version. There's no consistency to what we're doing. All right, so yeah, the vintage toy, it was cool. Sorry for the blurry picture. It's not that many good shots of him online, of the cross-sell. And you'll notice he's actually in the exact same pose there. We did that very much on purpose with all the figures, making sure the modern figures had the same pose. The bio on the back, all New Adventures bios, were actually super simple, barely an inconvenience, because the vintage figures, all the New Adventures, were the only He-Man toys that actually had bios on the back. The 1982 line just had one line of copy, like He-Man defends Eternia with his friends and allies. But for the New Adventures characters, just Tuscador, just for a random example, they all had like paragraph long bios. And that was great because that basically became the first 2/3 of the Classics bios, just picked up word for word. And getting all of the Classics figures, or rather all the New Adventures figures, done in Classics, well, it wasn't a goal we met. One, I'm really proud of how many we did. We did a lot. We did a lot more than I expected we'd get to do, and I'm glad we started getting to the more obscure villains, because honestly, they were the most colorful of all the characters. I think if anyone was going to be, fun to do in Classics, it was really going to be the Space Mutants, at least from the New Adventures line. We did get to some of the heroes as well, but again, they're not as exciting. They're kind of boring. They're just humans, with jetpacks or scuba suits or skimpy space bikinis or, I don't know, cutoff shirts, whatever that is. No, we never got to Staghorn, though. Maybe we should have. Would that have mattered? I don't know. He is pretty cool. Anybody with horns on his head attached to his head is cool with me.